Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, I think we're cool. All right, that's the trick, I guess. Right? Yeah, you know, it's just some windows. All right, let's do this thing. Yeah, I'm gonna try not to read all the slides to you, okay? That's one of my 2 goals, and not to talk fast and talk too fast. Second goal. Let's do this thing. So, hey, what's going on? Tim Tyrrell. I'm not gonna read all these slides. It's a true thing, that's why I kind of like to put it up there.
Nice.
She graduated in 1971, the second graduating computer science class of Knox College in Illinois. It's kind of cool. Almost half a decade.
Wow.
Huh? It's a thing.
It's impressive.
It's a thing.
Okay.
You've already heard of this. I started last June. It's actually my 12th employer, which I like to tell people, even though I'm embarrassed after I say it. It's all cool. It's all my choice. Yeah, this one I'm proud of, though. Black slides have some glare in here, don't they? They do. They do. All right, cool. Yeah. Understand that last one if you can. And yeah, that's seriously all I know. I'm just bullet points. I just plow through bullet points. It's just my brain works that way. Just boop, 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 boop. So let's do this thing. Double. Don't look at the door. And I saw this on Facebook. So this is actually this is a pic of apparently the entry about me in the 8th grade graduation ceremony pamphlet. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I think my dad gave it to me. Actually, I spelled Lawrence wrong there. That's weird. Anyway, I did do it though. That's the thing though. I actually did do it. All right. So my goal tonight is this topic could be so, we can go so deep in so many ways. So I'm just going to kind of broadly cover a lot of things, but it should be good. It'll be good. A lot of information, a lot of concepts, but we'll plow through them. So this is how I hope you will leave. Although I'm not the boss of you, leave how you want. You know, basically know what's possible, and don't be afraid of this JS stuff as much anymore. And again, this is actually not like a JS talk. It's just JS can be part of this talk or part of the tooling. So if I forget to say it, remind me to say, hey, where does Rails fit in? And I'll be like, oh yeah, duh. It's very clear, and a couple Fs. I might have gotten one already. So I think I'm doing all right. Let's do this thing. So, and what are we doing? You want to know what's going on when you can leave. So we're just going to cover a bunch of what these things are, why you do them, how you do them, and then I'm going to go into actually what these micro-frontends are. So that's the MFE acronym I'm going to use. And then also talk about the current JS landscape in modern Rails. JS bundler, import maps, sprockets, prop shaft, Shaka Packer. Very quickly, all of them. But I've read about them, so you don't have to. Okay, that's and then some future-looking, interesting micro-frontend patterns. Again, using the acronym there because I don't want to type this thing out too much. And let's get going. So, wait, what the hell? Is this about Isn't this about micro-frontends? Wait a minute. Why would we talk about this then? Why would we talk about this here? So let's talk about what microservices are, right? And you know, you can think of it right. Develop a single app with a bunch of small apps, right? Small services, right? That's what a microservice architecture is. I took this from Brandfolder. I didn't make this up. The next one I made up. But we'll keep going on. So basically, microservice architecture. Again, not micro-frontends, microservices. So why do you do microservices? What are some advantages that you can think of? I want to just ramble them off. Why do you do microservices? Like, what's the point?
Independent scaling.
It's a good one.
Boundaries between teams.
Yes, great one. And I'll just go through, yes, I put a few down here, clear seams of separation. That's maybe a bullshit one, but I put it down there anyway. Independent deployments, isolation, running their own processes, right? So you can, I think we'll get to it, you can scale them independently.
Job security.
That's what I was thinking, Chris.
Chris said job security.
Yes, well that's also where the different programming languages comes in, sort of wankery there, possibly. But anyway, also yeah, independent team control. I don't like the phrasing there, but you kind of get what I mean, right? And also, I mean, some of this is kind of like almost organizational versus technology, but these are all relative or real things we know about. Organizational scaling, vertical scaling. So one is just, hey, we got a bunch of people, you guys work on the login screen, versus like, hey, this thing that puts all these messages out, we need to scale this thing up, it's getting hammered or something. So disadvantages, I didn't put many here. Name some real quick.
Complexity.
Yeah.
They're too small, they clog everything up and they interlock and become impossible to run anything.
Yeah.
Interdependency, interlock.
Right. And tangentially, remote, or what is it, transactions over, that's a thing, a big thing.
You
So-
Docker.
Yeah, that's a disadvantage. Maybe. Remote calls, things get slow, right? Operational complexity, how do you log this thing, trace it? And also authentication, I'll throw it in there. This one word can mean so much, but it's a thing, right? So let's get to micro-frontends, right?
Chris says code consistency.
And siloing. Like the skiing. That's
All right.
skiing.
Yeah.
That's the new.
All right, so now away from services, now we're talking about like more of the presentation of the service, right? I put these words together. It's not life altering, it's just similar. So it's like you have this complete front-end experience for consumer through the deployment of multiple applications. So it's just a little different than we talked about before. Also, one thing that I didn't mention in the last slide is one thing that's nice about micro-frontends is they're not as tied to the database, right? It's a lot easier to chop something up when it's not trying to figure out where the account model is touching everything, right? Things like that. So let's see. So, and also I want to talk about this here. Let me go through these first. This is what I'm not talking about today at all. And we're getting through this already. We're 20% through, I swear. Is we're not saying that Rails is best as API server. You shouldn't have views, right? No ERB. Like that's not what we're saying today in any way. We're not saying monoliths are unmaintainable either, right? And of course, every time I write these, I have to think about this guy right here, because you can pull the GitHub card.
Yeah, it's still monolith.
With these things. Yeah, you don't need, to break things out, micro-frontends, microservices. When your team reaches a certain size, your company is not necessarily less successful without a spot. It may be more successful, right? I'm not advocating for any of this stuff, so just be aware of that, right? And why? Because I'm not a moron, right? I've experience in the industry, and I can't foolishly say everything should be React. That is, we all know incorrect, right? Certain things, there's use cases for things, we'll move on. So, and that's not what this is about anyway. Actually, the point of what we're talking about today is that how do we maybe fit the best use case where we can without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? So, moving on, what is going on here? Oh, sorry. There we go. Here's some thoughts. So let's just think about this real quick. This is just real quick. So a page basically is composed of different pieces, and I'll show you UI in like 2 seconds. Also, it's pieced together, right? So if you have a button, or maybe, where a header goes, but maybe you have some sort of different interfaces, like I can't think words right now, like a carousel, product carousel. It's there, you can put it where you want. You don't know where these go. So these are composed into different pieces of this front end, right? And then, they can be controlled by different teams, right? Some can control the logins, some control other parts. And so this is just a picture of that, which I drew in Lucidchart yesterday. They did a pretty good job. So think about this, right? You have a header, and there was a really good article in React, I don't know if it was like 8 years ago, it was about just thinking in components like this. And so you have a header here, you have a product carousel, you have a footer, right? There's actually more to it than this, and we'll get to that in a second. So just think about this in pieces, right? The whole point is we have pieces here, and where do they come from? Let's keep going on. And let me ask this question to you. So when we say micro-frontends, what's the most simple one? I know someone's gonna say something, right? What's the most simple one you can think of, right? Micro-frontend. And that word sounds complex, but it's not.
Button?
Yeah, iframes, right? That's what I think of, right? But partials could be, yes, and we can get to that in a minute, right? So let's go, we're going through a few different implementations of micro-frontends, right? So it's not as complicated as you think. And again, this is all just like, hey, how can we add things in where we need them into our application? And a lot of this, let me just be clear, is coming from where I work now. We have a 10-year-old Rails app, right? It's not necessarily API driven, or you could say, fat controllers, slim views, however phrasing you want to do it, right? I know we have React in at least 150 entry points into views, right? So it's not like, hey, let's get rid of this and put React there. First off, not the right choice for lots of reasons. If nothing else, skill sets and speed and lots of reasons, but also just it's not feasible. So how could we fit things in where it makes sense? And just let you think about if there's places where this could help. So iframes, and you may think this is silly, but and I'll show you code really quick for this one. You know what this is, right? It's a tag, and I'll show you the code in 1 second. It communicates in weird ways, though, right? So you can pass query parameters in, and the thing in the iframe can do things based on that. You could have the outer frame, I guess the parent, we'll call it that, listen for events down below, or post messages back and forth, right? So what are use cases for this? You think of a couple like chat widgets, right? Those are like all iframes, right? And also, so it's not like in maps, right? You pulled in like a Google map inside your app or something like that. And just, there's some trade-offs. It's kind of interesting here because each iframe, it can have a memory leak and blow up or, slow your app down, but also it's isolated, which is kind of nice, right? So it's a way to keep things safe. I'm not going to get into the security of it or things like that, but there's stuff to worry about, right? It's not as simple as, I think we mentioned HTTPS and HTTP earlier on. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. And this is me at home putting the Boulder Ruby site in an iframe. Look, I did that. Nice. I controlled that, yeah. Cool. I was able to do that, right? And here's me making a great slide. There we go. This is the code. It's just nothing, right? It's an iframe script in an area file that pulls it in and gives it a thing. So it can be that easy, right? And you say, this is kind of silly, right? But I think 2 months ago at my job, we acquired a company, UI templating page, and I worked on integrating that into our application for our customers to use. So people could sell it, right? And people could get the features, right? So it's like, it may sound silly, but these are things that are actually can be useful. In many use cases, it's very clear why they're nice. This is one of my favorites. Right?
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
Can you dig into that a little bit more? Like,
no.
I would reach for.
Yes, go. No, go for it.
So you would reach for an iframe when you have an existing app that renders HTML that fits in a certain point on a page or can occupy a whole page and it's totally independent. Is that kind of when you reach for an iframe and you just want like a quick and dirty solution, or what are you kind of talk about some trade-offs and stuff, but like
yeah. Well, I'll say this, right? So my company bought a company in Australia, right? And they had this templating application, right? So we have this in our app. We wanted to be able to suck this in so customers could use it, right? And how do we? They have a Rails app in somewhere else, like we're in GCP. I think they may be I forget the AWS. It's just things like that. So there's complications there, and there's other factors you always think like, okay, and we'll get to this, right? Like header and the footer. How do we? There's just silly things like that, right? But also, okay, how do we? Let me get back to this. So we did things with JWTs to make sure it was secure, right? Had our apps talking back and forth a bit, based on our query strings we passed in, and they saved stuff in the database. So it's mainly it's hard to say what a good use case for an iframe is. Besides, I guess I didn't think about this, but like for example, with the chat widget, right? I guess that's a clear one, right? Because I actually worked at a startup where we created a chat application for people's sites. And here, what if the JavaScript throws an error, right? Like things happen, right? So how do you like not expose that to their application? Or how do you not throw things at their century, right? So it picks it up. I mean, so one way is nice just to isolate things in that manner so you don't things don't get out and get in, right? And it's also a safe place too, right? Because based on it's secure in lots of ways. Again, I'm not getting into it at all, but you can throw a Google map, in the middle of your page, and it's safe, secure. If it memory leaks, no big deal. You kill it. it's sort of like an isolation thing in my mind in the best way, but it can be used quick and dirty a lot, I guess. So it's kind of, so I'm saying like people think quick and dirty, but there's so many actual real use cases for it when you actually dig into it. So I know I didn't explain that maybe super thoroughly, and if someone wants to say a couple words, feel free, but.
Third-party apps, so like I said, I do deeper integrations, I do.
Third-party apps.
They're always iframes, because that's how they get you in the page, but keep you isolated. They can pass you data, but you're not passing stuff back up to them. You can't read your parent page, so that's very common usage.
Another one is if, say you've got, your Rails app and you need to surface it inside the corporate website, which is a WordPress web application, and they can just make a page for your application inside the WordPress thing, and then you're iframed in. And actually, you can be inside and outside the iframe because you'll get the header that says you're in an iframe, and you can pick a different layout based on whatever you need to, and go back in there. I've done that, and the opposite, where the Rails app and you've got some other aspect, like merging another company or another marketing group or something like that, and you need to blend two sites live together in some way. And iframes are a totally reasonable way to get that out the door your first.
Yeah, do it in 2 weeks, okay.
Do it in 2 weeks, you're done. And then it'll last for 3 years while the rest of the merger happens.
I haven't heard a word about it, so.
Yeah.
So it's all.
And some of that communication between the iframe and everything works pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot with a little.
So job security.
You can make the new VP happy. That works really well. So,
VPs love iframes.
yeah, VPs love
They do.
when everything's
Until you try to explain it to them.
Yeah. Nobody can explain it. All right, let's move on. I have a couple more implementations we'll go to. So Nginx, right? Okay, so we're talking about micro-frontends, right? So where does Nginx fit in? And it's pretty clear, and I'll talk a bit about this, right? And Nginx is just, we'll talk about that later, but yeah, that's that's a great one. I forgot about that till the very end today. I'm like, oh yeah. So Nginx, it's hard. I won't get into who loves Nginx. If you don't love it, you haven't used it. Or something like, I don't say Varnish or other things like that, or talk about other yeah. But anyway, so what is it? I don't know, we'll talk about it now, but so the way to utilize it, or one way to utilize it, is to have a skeleton app as a shell. And what does that mean exactly? I've got a graph or a chart I drew up in Lucid Chart. I'll show you in a second. But so what you do with this a lot of times is do route-based. So you hit a different URL, like page 1, and that's actually a different application. So it's a way to sort of organize, it's sort of stitched together. Stitch isn't the right word. That's actually the other server side includes later. Yeah, but it's a way to basically group a bunch of applications together and have people not even realize they're different applications. And you may say this is kind of bullshit. Yeah, and also, again, this is what I wanted to bring up earlier. This doesn't mean JavaScript. This means any app. This could be WordPress, this could be PHP, this could be 2 Rails apps. It redirects you somewhere else. So I drew this exciting Lucid chart earlier. And what this means is, someone makes a request, Nginx sees this and goes, all right, where do I send this, right? And these are actually different applications. Someone may not know this. So it could be like tabs and tabs at the top of a web page or something like that, right? And so here is possibly correct or incorrect Nginx syntax, but you get the picture, right? So it's actually this simple, right? Or something close to this simple, is based on the URL coming in, you shoot them to a different application. And the point here is it's a proxy. So the URL looks like you're still in the same application, even though you may not be. And it also gives you benefits with getting around, maybe API calls and CORS issues and things like that, which is why it's fantastic. So, and also, I'll just say this now, but why Nginx is just amazing is, of course, caching. We've used it my previous job for just what is it? Where like people keep trying to log in, right? You can that.
Tossing.
Yeah, throttling. Yes, exactly that.
Every PR page on GitHub goes through this. We split it within one page. So like this sidebar is one Rails request, and the timeline's another Rails request, and the header is another. And then Nginx stitches them together, serves them out.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. What do I have here? Yeah, some issues. Sometimes if you have a page refresh, I think if you do this incorrectly, it's not always a page refresh, is it? I was trying to think of this when I wrote this down. Like, here's a weird thing, right? If you have 3 different applications, though, right? What about the header and footer, right? What do? Is it, NPM package? Is it you copy and paste stuff? I'll mention, I was reminded when I worked at Walmart many years ago, we actually had an XML web service we'd call to get the header and footer. And this is internally to Retail Link for the suppliers. And we would just response.write with .NET, because it's just HTML, CSS, or whatever onto the page. And also at a previous company, we were looking at having, we have like basically branded different for the e-commerce. And we're just like, we can't spend like 3-4 weeks to like check this out. We're just like, open it up, HTML viewer, copy paste, boop. I mean, my point is there can be workarounds for things. It doesn't have to always be the setting up components and deploying things. There can be dirty workarounds that actually work fairly well.
They just be their own micro-frontend?
What's that?
Just make them another.
They could be that, yes, exactly. So that's a good point too. So yeah, so this is also talking about if there's a shell or a skeleton app too, right? Well, if we're switching pages, it's different, but yes. And I was going to talk about that a little bit with the next piece. But yes, that is good. Yes, let's keep moving in. Oh, and also to Joel's point, actually, just because we're talking about it, I love Nginx and whatnot, is like, even if you're not doing things like this, it's great to have it in front. Because even like you go to Nginx's site and read about it, and they'll be like, if you put like a 1-second caching in there, it like increases the performance of your app or takes the load off by like 8 times. Like you just do amazing things with this stuff. So anyway, moving on. And also sidecar, right? Anyway, moving on. So module federation, this is something I want to touch upon. This is kind of an interesting thing. And so we're going to talk about this and then go into the Rails JavaScript. So we're going to keep plowing through. We are halfway done with the slides. Sorry, EV checkpoint. So this actually comes baked into Webpack 5, which is something you need to know when we talk about these Rails options later. There's a plugin for Webpack 4, but don't worry about that. You're not going to use it. So it's similar to just micro-frontends in general, right? So remember, this is MF, Module Federation, not micro-frontends, but it empowers micro-frontends. So you basically have separate builds to form a single application. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know. This is kind of getting more into the guts of it. It's a bunch of words there, but your builds are containers that expose and consume code between other builds. So you create a single application out of multiple applications. And let's get into what this means. So first, let's talk about, what are we even trying to solve with this? And so here's how we do things these days, generally. Again, this is more JavaScript land, but you're familiar with it. So you take a component and go, we want to share this around, right? Let's put it in the shared repo that nobody wants to do. Switch that project, make the changes, fix the test, bump the version, deploy the code, then bump the version to all the things using it, redeploy the code, the whole like hokey pokey, every time you're like, I just want to change, like add one parameter, like what the crap, this sucks. Tooling helps with this. A lot of it's more organizational or cultural, honestly. It's just like, it's not that hard, just go with the other repo. And that's where, different heavy mono repos comes in to make this easier, but we're not talking about that today. So with module federation, what do we do? So you actually have an application that exposes this. So anything that wants to use it can consume it. I don't mean anything, it's not like on the internet, right? It's more of a, just think about, you're exposing, instead of building something and deploying it, then something sucks it in and then builds, and then you actually expose something that people can pull in. And what does that mean? The key is runtime. And I didn't say that word yet, and I'll talk about it in 1 second. So, it's normal use cases, several builds per page. Component library is a container. And what does that mean? So think about it flipped, right? Instead of doing things at build time, what if you did it at runtime? And what does that mean? So if you open up your Rails app and refresh the page in a different application which is exposing this other component, push a new version, you get it right then. It's a weird paradigm, and you probably think of 10 reasons why that's terrible right now, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it more. It's interesting, intriguing though, right? What if you didn't have to update the 15 applications that have new headers to give a new header, right? And they just, next time they load, they get it. Or what about dynamically doing it to A/B test different things? That's pretty interesting. We're not going to get deep into that, but so again, independent deployable, we know that's a good thing, but this is a runtime deployment, not a build time, which again brings up like 50 questions. So runtime, yeah, does this make sense to you? So if you deploy something, it's consumed by other things at runtime. So module federation is one way to achieve this. And I'm going to give you some examples, because again, it's a little weird. And so host applications do not need to redeploy to see the change go live. All applications have the same version of the code immediately. What about breaking changes? We're not going to talk about that. We'll talk about it later. Okay, so what's the downside, right? There's a lot of downsides, or there can be, right? Well, I mean, it's almost like you don't, if you build something locally, right, you don't really have the final product, right? Because it's sucking other things. So it's kind of in a weird state in itself, because when you deploy it, at runtime, it actually pulls in other things. So let's get into what that means. And who uses this, by the way? Oh, there's actually companies. It's not like a thing made up that I'm talking to you about from nowhere, right? I have a buddy at Shopify, they use it. My buddy Tan at Oracle, they use it. So he actually could get this talk better than me, possibly, by the way. He did a lot of this stuff there. So, or VMware, I should say.
In the Rivians.
Yes, there's companies. So it's a real thing. It's really used. So this is another thing I drew. It's okay. But the way to think about this, right, is okay, so you have an app over here that is exposing the header and the footer, okay? A different app is exposing the product carousel. And then you have this other app, or apps, and also these can be circular, by the way, and that's fine. They can be, it's not a problem. Another app, any app can consume these that's, that wishes to and knows how to. So what is code? Let's show us the code. Sorry, this slide's blurry for some reason. Okay, here is a BS React component, right? It's a header, it's a function component, no big deal. With, I think, Tailwind, right? Which I don't know about, but I copied it. So this is the small piece of the Webpack config. The key part is that plugin there, okay? So you see new plugin, and it's part of Webpack, so you don't have to add something else new, right? You say, hey, this is a name, it's nav, just remember nav. This is the file name, and then, hey, it's in source header. This thing back here is in source header. That's where it's located. I'm gonna expose it as header. And there's a couple things, okay? And the reason we have these shared, we talk about React DOM, is because state. These things share state, right? So if there's hooks or things going on, you need to have one unified library using it, otherwise shit hits the fan. So this says, hey, just share these libraries between the actual apps consuming it. It can be more complicated, right? And then this is a consuming app. Again, you have to memorize this. The whole point is you're just saying, I have this component, and I'm sharing it out. And this thing, this other app that consumes it says, hey, the whole point is nav at blah. It's called my nav. That's all you know, right? Nav at blah, that's what's shared out, is now my nav. And then there's one more code side. Wait for it, we'll get to it. Oh, son of a. Then this thing takes it in, right? And so the thing to note here is this is asynchronously loaded in. So it loads the module asynchronously, but it evaluates it synchronously. So that's why you need to use React Lazy. So it's importing this thing called myNav header, which is from a different application. And you see it's there at line 11. It's a little hard to see. You actually use it as a component. So I could pass a callback in there. I could pass props down. So you actually literally get components, for example, remotely. You can do this with Vue, Svelte, all these things, right? And even use them in the same application with module federation, which is kind of wild. Different technologies. So I won't get into it, use React Suspense just to handle when it's not ready. Again, a little hand wavy, but you're literally pulling in components from remote areas and using them in other apps. It's pretty freaking wild. But you might go, hey, what if that app goes down? Right? What the hell?
What if that app goes down?
What if that app goes down? Don't worry about that. No, but let's think about this, right? So what is this? This is just JavaScript, right? This is just a static file. Cache it, right? CDN, one call, done. Cache it till you bust it next time. I mean, that's one way to do it. Marty's like, I know CDNs, I don't know, let's talk about this.
So would this be like an assets dot, you'd run it in production on its own DNS, this component server that works?
Yeah, or however you want. Or literally I could have an admin application and I'm like, shit, this is a really common component that all these other people need to use. You can expose it there. It doesn't have to be a certain, it could be any app, right? Anything with Webpack 5 can expose things and other things can suck it in and use it, right? It doesn't have to be like a skeleton app or a container app that pulls in and builds, stitches things together, right? And let me take that one step further. It doesn't have to be a component, just something that resolves the promise. So you can do it with business logic, IATN strings, like you update for translations and then don't want to deploy them to every app, right? Like they can suck them in. Yeah, so again, you saw it, it's just like importing a component, right? It's just from somewhere else. And we'll talk about, there's actually some interesting thing with import maps kind of does this too, which is really kind of interesting. Yeah, and it can run on any platform, right? It doesn't have to be browser, Node, web workers, Electron, right? Also, again, and every time I see this, by the way, just so you know, like, I always like, this is the golden hammer, like, everything can be solved by module federation. Then you think about it, we're like, well, maybe not, but it has some cool things, right? It's like, shit, I have to make a freaking component library anymore? But yeah, so yeah, different view frameworks. You might have to leverage SQL SPA, not gonna talk about it, but I mentioned it. So,
How do you debug it?
How do you integration test it?
yeah, yeah. Let's just keep going, maybe I cover it later.
We're gonna wait till man in the middle attack
Maybe
here.
I cover it later. Maybe I cover it. We're getting into the last quarter, we're almost done. Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll save it for the question side. Save it for the question section. All right, so there's also some other ones, single SPA. You may have heard of that. If not, you could hear of it. It's fine. There's also edge side includes, server side includes. Like, what's that? Isn't that what you mentioned? Like,
Edge side includes is basically I've used it before with Varnish, where you can have basically a special tag.
Yeah, exactly.
HTML.
Think like handlebars or something. Just think of like something like that, right? And you just kind of.
Yeah, but it's done on the same one. It'll pull in, make the additional request, but at like Varnish level, and then it'll cache the results. And so, your app is just side included in another app.
Yeah.
But it surfaces to the browser as a single web page with no iframes. So.
Yeah, like just think about like there's so many use cases that just come to mind. Like, so basically, just think about you have these edge caching things right in front of your apps everywhere across the world. Something comes in and you say, hey, if they're from Bolivia, put this banner ad up there. To tell them to buy cheese or something. I'm making this up, right?
I mean, that's one way to do it, where your edge side include is your banner header, and it can use information on the incoming thing. And it basically sends the request out to another service to inject a piece of code there. Server side include is the same thing, but it's all done locally on the same machine. And generally that would be like Apache's the old school server side include. And it would just basically call out to another CGI function.
Not new technologies.
Not new technologies at all. Those are as old as the web.
Yeah, and so how does that fit in with Rails? How does any of this stuff fit in with Rails? We talked about like Nginx, remember? We talked about module federation, which is a pretty cool thing that people actually use. We talked about iframes. There's in the ones we just talked about, right? So let's talk about, so again, Webpacker's deprecated, right? What do we do? And there's things like Turbo and Hotwire. So let's do a quick pass through Rails JavaScript so you don't have to. I did it for you. You may know more than me about some of this, but we'll do it really quick. So what the hell is there, all this crap? What is this stuff? I don't know. Sprockets, we know about that, right? There's a new one coming out, PropShop, you heard of this, the thing. Import map Rails, that is the default now in a Rails 7+ application. JS bundling Rails is, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about each of these really quick, one slide each. You could choose Webpack, they put ESBuild or Rollup. I don't know why you use Rollup. Shaka Packer, which is the blessed next Webpacker. But in there you can also use, but actually with Shaka Packer, you don't have to use Webpack, which is kind of funny. You use ESBuild or SWC, which is sort of like a really quick Babel loader. How about that? But actually Turbo and Stimulus and all that works with any of these, just so you know, right? So you get a new Rails app, what do? You have some options, right? And we'll talk about them really quick. In this one, I like, all right. So JS bundling, Rails, JS bundling. You actually get to pick what you want. If you don't care about the Webpack stuff we're gonna talk about in a second, ESBuild is probably the way to go. Less worried about it, it's faster. This seems like a weird statement, but with like import maps, you can't really use NPM packages, so like you have to like bring this up. Yeah, if you want to use TypeScript or React, you probably want to use this one. If you want the less complicated one, So what does this slide mean? There's gems you can use to make like React and stuff like that. Again, I don't mean to keep saying React, but easy inside Rails apps. With JS bundling, instead, you'd probably do a, like React DOM dot render or whatever, you slap it on onto the DOM somewhere, which is fine. This does use sprockets, the asset pipeline, as it were, as it is. And so what's kind of cool, like the thing that's annoying about Webpacker is there was this stupid YAML file. And if you ever had to like do something with Webpack, it got in the way. Although it was nice, it helped you, right, if you never had to think about it. But you actually literally have a webpack.config.js file with JS bundling, if you choose Webpack, for example. So there's no like YAML layer between you. So basically, it bundles your stuff, and then Sprockets will then take it and do its crap afterwards to hand wave a bit. What you don't get is code splitting and some really nice Webpack stuff out of the box. And there may be some questions in the chat, unless those are really old.
HMR stands for?
Hot module reloading, right?
Yeah.
Refresh. So I feel like it's more exciting than it really is. It's like you can update your code and it hot changes like the component in there without you having to refresh. Yeah. It's fine. Code splitting is more important, by the way. You know what that is, right? Like, so if you go to like a settings page, it doesn't pull your crap in from the home page because you don't need it. So you can have these slimmer bundles for the pages where they're needed. Getting through it. Import maps. This is kind of funny stuff. Newest paradigm, default. This is funny. I thought DHH made it up. He didn't. It's a thing. People know this, right? It's like a real like ECMAScript thing.
It's like Columbus discovering America.
Yeah, like he's interesting. He actually finds pretty cool stuff sometimes. You import JS modules directly from the browser. What the hell does that mean? It uses the SI pipeline. I'll explain what that means in 1 second. I wish I didn't have a slow change of this. You have to say this because it's a bad slide. So you don't have like a package JSON file. You have a different type of file. And so do people know, do people use this at all or they read about it? Yeah, okay. It's like you're pulling stuff from like the JavaScript CDN. But if you want to keep it, you can save it in your vendor folder. It's like, sounds really weird, but it makes sense in some ways. But it's just a different paradigm. What doesn't make sense is you can't, like, how do you use TypeScript with it? Can you? Like, I don't even think you can. Like, it says you can't. So it's like, why would you, so it's, if you're like on the path of JavaScript and Hotwire and Stimulus and things, this is probably fine, right? So just, that's what I'm trying to say to you here, okay? Yeah, if you don't want to use React or TypeScript, a little confusing. Shaka Packer, I wish I was more excited about this. I just don't think people are using it. So it's supported, right? Which means, DHS, I guess we're recording this, said some other consulting company can, run with it, right? But I just don't think people are really using it as much. What's interesting is, not interesting, is you don't need sprockets with this, right? You can just use Webpack. The other ones use sprockets as well. Why does it matter? Well, maybe it doesn't. But it can be used. It can be nice to have one specific runtime for all your assets going through. Hot module reloading, all the normal stuff from Webpack, right? It's sort of like Webpacker. It is Webpacker. It's just further on and supported. And let me be clear real quick is that some of you may be on Rails 7 now. Is anybody on Rails 7 on like a real app? Look at this. Okay, cool. Are you using Webpacker still, or did you ever?
We're using ESBuild.
Same.
Did you switch to that?
Yeah, we used Rollup and we switched to ESBuild.
Okay. Yeah, because you can actually still use the old deprecated Webpacker. That's what I want to say here. But like, you don't want to because it's 3 years old, all the stuff, right? All the dependencies. But you still could. I just want to make that point because I didn't think that was clear. Like I thought you have to get off at Rails 7. You don't. You should though. Also, you can do server-side rendering, and there's all view helpers and whatnot, right? So, last note. This is the end, friends. Where did I even write here? Oh yeah. So one thing to mention is that like Webpack. I don't know if people know this, right? So Webpack it's sort of, let's say Webpacker is deprecated, but Webpack is also, it's not deprecated, but so the main author of Webpack was hired by Vercel, right? They do a bunch of cool stuff, Next.js, Turbo Repo, and TurboPack. Not to be confused with whatever DHH's turbo thing is. I'm sorry, I don't even know what it is. But so TurboPack is sort of like a Rust-based rewrite of Webpack, and it's going to slowly do all the things that Webpack will do supposedly. So that's what currently you can, like with Views Next, you can start slowly using these features, like pulling in Rust things, which is pretty cool because stuff starts building a lot faster. So my point is, this is on the horizon, so just be aware of this, okay? Because people say, Webpack sucks, it's slow. Well, it's getting faster, and it does a lot of cool stuff. That's it. Too many questions. There are a lot of questions. Import math is awesome, says Chris.
Yeah.
What do you know?
How many titles did you get?
What was your count?
Total, maybe 8, not per person though. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions, right? You're like, I mean, I covered a bunch of stuff, right? And I still didn't cover a lot, right? There's tons of stuff. You could delve deeper in lots of areas. Also, module federation brings up like 15 questions. It's really cool. People use it, but then you're like, well, why do you handle a breaking change? Like maybe it's similar to how you handle it with NPM. You just push a new version, a breaking version, right? You expose a new version. There's certain questions that I don't get yet, but I would like to know better and find out. So anyway, I read the book. I bought the book.
If you're importing these, if you have these dynamic JS dependencies,
Thank you.
is there any sort of layer to catch like an unintentional breaking change? So it's one thing to have a breaking change you know about,
Yeah.
but it's another to have one that like traditionally we would catch with like CI, or something like that. That like would just say like, okay, when I load this page and like this version of this package comes in, I get a console error.
Yeah, so let's hand wave and claim, okay, CI, there's some sort of EDE process that would catch something, okay, but let's say there's not. Okay, there is also, I don't know if you saw in there, but there's fallbacks. And you can even do this, for example, is you can actually publish, let's say I have a header, I could publish it as an NPM package. And the app can say, this is the fallback if it breaks. So I can fall back to 1.0 if the new thing doesn't work. Like there's things you can do. I don't mean to just go to that.
You can just say, but that's like if there's any exception inside the package. So like if I load the header and I run like 100 lines of code, and then like it renders and I click on something and that click triggers an error, it will then go load the old header and see if that click actually works. Because that's where a lot of exceptions come from, is like, like something that integrates down the line.
Yes, so you can use React error boundaries with these things to handle some of these things. So I would say that would probably be a concern of the component inside of it, right? That you actually share out as opposed to the thing consuming it, which sounds bullshit.
Seems like you'd have to be pretty defensive.
Yeah, so yeah. So I have not personally used this on a large scale or a small scale. So yeah, but yeah, like certain obvious things come to mind. Just like, God, this can solve. I don't have to do this stuff. Then you're like, what about this thing? So I don't have all the answers.
Because your builds aren't reproducible then at that point. So like if you could get some really weird debugging cases where you're like, okay, customer, what version of the header did you have?
Yeah.
Well, they might not know because the page refreshed and they got a different one.
Yeah, I could have sworn my buddy at Shopify said they actually use it at build time and not runtime.
That would make more sense.
But then how's that different than, like how do you, yeah. So like, that's what he told me, right? They use it at build time. So maybe it just sucks in the latest thing at build time as opposed to like publishing it somewhere and getting a whatever. But I don't have all the answers, but I don't know. It's interesting to think about a different paradigm and you're like, shit, that's scary. But maybe once things are fleshed out more or whatever. Oh, sorry. And go back to import maps though. So with import maps, I found an article. It's like import maps is an extra module federation. And I'm like, what? Because, well, that's pulling remote code in, right? From like CDNs and whatnot, right? It's just sort of similar to what module federation is doing in a sense, where it's pulling in, whatever's deployed, it pulls it in. Well, you could say NPM's the same way in theory, but it's more like what's deployed you pull in. So anyway, I blathered. I'll stop.
Chris's hands up.
I don't want to talk to you.
Quick question, Tim. So I'm familiar with how this works in Turbo and Hotwire on a single app and talking to different frames. But when you have multiple apps in this system, how does one keep up to real-time communication with the other?
Never use the technologies. I can't answer that.
Okay.
I'm serious. Yeah. Anybody can speak to that? Like I know, like you could say, like for example, like if you had various apps and you could have one Redux store, they can all share that and use that, and it gets plugged in when that comes in, right? There's things like that you can do, but I wouldn't know how to do it with hardware. I don't know the answer.
I'm saying in the EMF system that you're describing, in that system, not hotwire, and I'm talking about in that system, you have two apps.
Yeah.
How do they talk to one another? Is there like, I mean, how to keep them up to date? That's what I was curious about.
Well, yeah, because actually with Module Federation, it's easier than the other ones we talked about because they're literally components you pull in, right? So it's just like a normal app. How do you manage a global state in a normal JavaScript app? It's the same answer would be.
So it doesn't know the difference even though they're hosted independently. It treats them like they're wired together.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's kind of what I was trying to show with the import.
Yeah.
It's sort of like it's actually in there, but it's not. I mean, it's from somewhere else, but it's actually there. So it's pretty wild. It's consumption. It's like, what?
That's
cool.
pretty awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
Is that almost like you're pushing the CDN to the client? Like the client is what's kind of a set, like Nginx is like a little bit of Nginx is running on the client where you're pulling things together.
no, it's just sort of like it's sort of like dependencies are asynchronously grabbed from somewhere instead of built in when the app's built. It's sort of like at runtime.
You're moving the source include link from your header from the header to inside another piece of JavaScript, roughly.
Yeah, like
Is this like an HTTP2 enabled technology? Like this would be a really bad idea when concurrent connection limits were lower?
no, but it's sort of like an extra. It's like just a chunk gets loaded in next.
Yeah, but your browser would be making an additional.
Your browser would make an additional request. So like if you were limited to a small number of concurrency.
Yeah, if your browser
This is
was like 3 parallel requests out, then yeah, this could definitely.
No,
So if
that's not really a thing anymore because the guidance is to use like code splitting with Webpack for per node module you have. So 200 requests, one for each lib because it doesn't really matter anymore. It doesn't really slow it down.
So if you have like,
It's kind of a
so if you're in
fallacy.
Africa and you have like 10% packet loss, you have a really bad time.
Yes.
You know your customers.
Yeah.
Know your customers.
Yeah. Or you're in Australia and you've got a 200 millisecond lag time.
Yeah.
That's the pitch with import map though too, right? It's just a separate, like
Yeah.
some of it can be fixed at build time, but some of it's happening just the browser's calling out to multiple URLs to load things, right?
Yeah. I think so. It's my understanding of it.
It
Yeah.
could be on CDNs and it could be local.
Yeah. It's all very different paradigms than we're used to, which is it's kind of cool. Just next 5 years it'll be interesting where it goes. So.
Well, the thing we're seeing is that like in our bundle, say 95% of the JavaScript you load on github.com comes from NPM. Well, it doesn't change every deploy. We change our NPM dependencies really rarely. So this actually would mean that our customers are downloading less JavaScript because they're able to cache most of what they're actually downloading from us. And the 5%, right, that we actually change regularly would be what would be churning. So it can reduce by churn.
Yeah. So your point is if you're getting 200 NPM modules sucked up.
Yeah. But what we do is we just put those all in their own separate build right now. We have a frameworks build and that's super stable. And you get a new frameworks build once a month when you just get them.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good point. So for example, you have 200 NPM packages going up, right? Well, it's crazy. But like we upgrade Lodash. Okay, one changes. Everything else still cached in the browser, cached in the CDNs, So it's not as many requests. Well, it's requests, but 3 or 4 or whatever. Okay, I'm done. Let's stop.
Good job.
Thanks.